Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next episode of the Direct Selling Executives Forum. My name is Ben Dixon and serve as president of the forum, and I'm pumped and excited that we not only have our host, Gail Ansado, here with us today, but we have Brett Duncan with Strategic Choice Partners, who's going to be here with us today. Now, if you haven't met Brett before, you are in for a treat. Brett has run Strategic Choice for years with Alan Luce. Rest in peace for Alan. He was an incredible human being in our space. We all loved Alan. And when I first met Brett, he had just transitioned from running platforms and doing work with Advocare to then serving just dozens and dozens of clients around the space. And anytime I've worked with Brett with another client and they've said, we've hired Brett Duncan to help with content, I'm always excited about that because Brett has taken a very special approach to how to create compelling content in direct selling. And the team he's worked with and the people he's put together are simply phenomenal. And so when this topic came up today, and we said because content is something that so many people you see it as a big difference. We see people who have made the investment and done the work and are continually creating content for their brand, and the ones who are still in the older world of just investing once a year and creating one new video here and there. And it's just such a dynamic difference in the social world we live in today. It's an important topic. So as it came up, I said, there's no one else I want to invite but Brett Duncan. And so, Brett, thank you so much for being here today. Pumped to have you here on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben. Yeah, looking forward to this. Yeah, I've done a lot of things in direct selling, but content and communication probably are ground zero for me. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, looking forward to today. So the questions have been coming in from the forum. Gail's going to go ahead and moderate and lead our session today. If you're watching on, or if you're listening on Spotify, or if you're on the LinkedIn stream, know that these are also saved on the YouTube channel as well. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Direct Selling Executives Forum, it's a free invite-only group on LinkedIn that's from other direct selling executives. There's no pitching or other events or things that are happening there, gang. It's all direct sellers and vendors sharing insights on topics that are relevant to all of us. And so definitely check out the forum if you haven't yet accepted an invitation there. It's a powerful place for you to plug in. So with that, let's pass it over to Gail and let's take a look at where the forum, and we'll jump into their first questions.
Thank you, Sir Ben, and welcome, Brett. Welcome to today's DSEF podcast, where we explore the world of referral marketing and uncover strategies that drive success. In the fast-paced digital landscape, content is king. And in referral marketing, it's definitely no exception. A well-crafted content strategy can amplify your referral marketing program, engage your audience, and ultimately drive more referrals and conversations and conversions as well. Today, we're going to uncover some of the secrets to creating a content strategy that wins. With the first question, let's kick it off with the obvious. What are the costs of running wild in the marketplace without a proper content strategy?
Boy, cutting right to the chase. Okay. What are the costs of running wild? Okay, a few thoughts here. First off, the main one would be what we generally would call opportunity costs, right?
Sure.
If you're out there running wild, content is king. We've been saying that phrase for a while, but what we do with content has changed a lot and changes a lot about every 6 months. And so, if you're going about a content strategy, based in 2015, then content might not be king, or you might be a little king, and that's not what we want. So opportunity costs, what I mean by that? Well, when you're creating content, are you doing it just to, hey, we've got to have content, so check it off the list, we filled it up, hey, we're doing a post today, whatever that means for you. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, because you do need a presence. And I've done it myself before. If that's all you're doing, you're missing out. And so the biggest opportunity cost would be missing out on content that can actually make an impact. Now, that's where you get back into your content strategy, because every piece of content can't be dropping the hammer on closing a deal or anything like that. But it's got to have a place in the ecosystem that it's actually contributing to the bigger strategy, right? And so that's a big part. And then for us in direct selling, that's talking from the brand perspective, but now we apply that to the thousands of distributors that we have in our sales force. And so depending on how they use that content or how you're equipping them with that content, not only are you taking a subpar strategy and doing it once, you're taking a subpar strategy and multiplying it by 1,000 10,000, 20,000. And so it's a big deal. The other costs that come to mind, I would say manpower. I've worked with a lot of companies. This is more just management and workflow, but because you haven't organized that, you're duplicating a lot of work, or a lot of it's last minute. And we all know what happens with last minute stuff. The other one too that comes to mind, for lack of a better term, I'll call it defensive costs. So you can either be on defense or offense, right? And I think all of us get enamored with, hey, I'm on offense, I'm making things happen. If you're not strategic or really thinking about the content that you're putting out there, or the content up front, obviously from a compliance standpoint, internal review standpoint, possibly even legal costs, right? Doing the work up front is pennies on the dollar to what that would all require long term. And then finally, the one we would all get excited about, and that's acquisition cost. So if you pay, depending on what you're doing, and this is changing so rapidly in direct selling, some of us look to our field to handle all of our acquisition. Others of us are doing really well thought online media, and that's all great. But then if you get their attention and then you introduce them to a subpar or an off-brand content experience, a lot of times people don't stick around. And I'll give you one of the most obvious ones when I'm looking at a client or talking with them is if they have a blog, if they have articles, which I think is a great thing to do, but if the last one they posted was 6 months ago or a year ago, that kind of tells me, oh, these guys aren't really with it. Now, that might be fair or unfair, but that's my initial impression, right? And so those are some of the costs that come to mind: opportunity costs, manpower costs, defensive costs, and then acquisition costs.
That's so interesting. I think that the lack of strategy, that cost you talked about, it makes you look unprofessional at the end of the day. What you just said, so good, Brett. Some people say, oh, let's start a blog and let's get 20 articles to spin it up. And they do that. And then anyone who's a blog reader knows that, hey, blogs are updated on a regular basis. And so if they see, oh man, this last article's hasn't been around for 6 months, they think, is this company even still in business? That same thing happens on Facebook. That same thing happens on Twitter and anywhere else. Oh, they have a Twitter page. They don't use it. They're not a part of the actual conversation. And so part of strategy indeed is even understanding how these different ecosystems work, like truly knowing it. You don't want to be the awkward guy or gal with your brand misrepresented. Like, it wouldn't work, as an example, to spend all this money on this beautiful LCD screen and turn your billboard into a long form video, right? Someone's driving down the highway, they can't consume your 10-minute long form video. And we all get that. Like, you would never spend much money and put a 10-minute video on the side of a highway. And yet we do the opposite in social media all the time. People try to treat social media or other tools like a billboard when it's not a billboard. It's the opposite problem. And then your thought about starting with impact. One of the things we do all the time in the DSEF is give book recommendations out. And when you were sharing that, I couldn't help but just think of Simon Sinek's Start With Why and his famous TED Talk on the Golden Circle. Gang, if you haven't yet read Simon Sinek's Start With Why to get clear on like any strategy, first understanding the deep why you're doing it and the impact first, you're missing out. And so just as a recommendation from what Brett's sharing today, guys, definitely take a look at that if you haven't read that book yet. And because it's true about any initiative in your life, anytime we start talking strategy, if you're not clear on why you're doing what you're doing and the impact you desire to create, you're just going to be running wild, as the forum question asked.
Yeah.
So that's
powerful. Well, and something struck me too. Another cost that comes to mind, and for lack of a better description, I'll call it platform costs. But or at least if you're in content, you get all interested in the algorithms and blah 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 blah. But that is changing. I mean, I just got back from DSA where Scott Kramer and Sam Hine were sharing some, the latest stats on, I forget exactly what it was, but like 0.4% of posts that have a link in it actually get shown. Little things like that, but understanding actually whatever platform you're using wants to be used. And it is so difficult to keep up with that. It's a challenge for anyone. But at the same time, if we don't keep up with it and we're using it, it could just be wasted time. You want to talk about major cost there. You put all this work into doing it. And then if you do it just the wrong way, or maybe the way that they used to do it, it doesn't matter. See it.
Brett, speaking to ghosting, if you don't understand the term ghosting, that term came from all the way in the past when people would breach the terms and conditions of Craigslist, if we all want to rewind 15 years. But if you guys remember back to Craigslist days, you're not allowed to post the same post twice. And so they let you post it, but they wouldn't show it. And all social networks today do the same thing, gang. So if you don't understand what Brett is speaking to here, about ghosting. It happens, gang. If you don't understand the algorithm of your platform, just what Brett shared, it is a real deal. And you could be teaching something that worked 8 years ago or 9 years ago that doesn't work to your field, and it's literally just wasted effort. So you got to take a look at that.
Thank you for those insights. And I'm pretty sure everybody's learning a lot from all of the costs that you did mention earlier. Now, when it comes down to creating a framework for winning a content strategy in direct sales, where should an executive team start exactly?
Yeah, this is it. This is the key, the framework. And I'm going to start with a story. So you mentioned I started my career on the corporate side on the marketing team at Advocare. After that, I was at led marketing at Manatech. And while I was at Manatech, and I'm going to use communication and content interchangeably here for the most part. They're slightly different, but a quick side note, it's good to have a content strategy, but the whole reason to have content is to communicate something. And so, I always talk about messages and mediums, and I know it should be media, but we have different thoughts of what media is. So messages and mediums. And normally we get very caught up in the mediums and we overlook the messages. And so we have to keep in mind that our content strategy at the end of the day is there to serve communication of some kind. Coming back to that, I was really struggling with managing communication while I was at Manatech because I think leading and planning communication for a direct selling company is one of the most difficult things in the world because you have so many audiences. Some people care about this part of what you do. Some people could not care less about this part of what you do. And, they're all involved so many different ways. And let's call it like it is. We've always got stuff going on, and normally too much stuff going on, which, by the way, is communication issue number one. Normally you have too many messages to share. So anyway, all that led to coming up with what I call a communication grid. And it's the framework that I used then, and it made a world of difference. And it's the framework I continue to use. It is not anything special, but it is very uncommon, I've come to find out. And the key is starting with, you need to capture every single touch point that you have in your company when it comes to content and communication. And when I say every single touch point, yes, we're talking about social media. Yes, we're talking about email. Yes, we're talking about websites. We're also talking about that weekly training call that someone does, which is an opportunity to communicate. If you do mail outs, it could be the on hold message. Like every single thing is a touch point. You need to capture that. And then the other thing that most companies make the mistake when we're putting together a content or a communication plan is that they expect the head, the director, whoever it is, the director of communications or the director of content to just figure all of that out. And that's not their job. Their job is, once they know what the prioritized messages are for that period of time from the company overall, their specialty is, I know what to do with those messages now. I know how to make that happen. Too many companies get frustrated with that person because they don't understand, or they might prioritize something above something else. Or it might be that the company has something set up to where the requester almost gets to determine, right? And so if you've got someone who's the product manager of a second tier product line, but it's the most important thing in her life, and she knows how to really submit that job request and put that campaign together or whatever, and someone else who's over something very important doesn't really know how to do all that stuff, if you're not filtering that, then the secondary product line gets all the attention because they put the work in, right? So it's a process that starts with the executive team simply coming together and saying, let's take it for a month period of time. What's important for this next month coming up? And let's, as a team, prioritize what that is. And once you do that, if you have a good director of content and communication and everyone that surrounds that, they can then take that and say, all right, here's how this is going to be reflected over all of our different touch points. This is how that's going to play into our social strategy. And again, those are different things. A lot of times different people doing that, but that is where most companies fail. They don't have that moment And it doesn't take long. You literally just brain dump, here's everything going on that's going to need to be communicated. And then you sort it and prioritize it. And if they have issues, they sit there and arm wrestle over it in that moment and figure it out. But that way everyone leaves understanding these are the prioritized messages for this period of time. No one needs to wonder that anymore. And then you go out and execute. And so any kind of framework like that, I feel like it needs to be done monthly for the upcoming month. I feel like that meeting of the executives typically needs to occur by the second week of the previous month, if not the first, and probably the first. And then that gives your team a good 2 weeks to pull off the execution. Some of you might be sitting there saying, oh, you need to be thinking about a lot of these things way ahead of that. And you do. But I'm talking about when we're getting boots on the ground, it's about to go, stuff comes up. This is beyond your strategy session, but this needs to be a monthly cadence. And I promise you, when you start doing that, not only is it going to help from a content standpoint, it's going to help production standpoint and excellence. You'll start seeing much better. All these creative people you've hired now will actually get to be creative versus trying to crank something out tomorrow that you just found out about today. And on that note, and then I'll shut up for a second, but there's obviously going to be plenty of things that you can't plan for.
Sure.
And that's the nature of what we do. That doesn't mean you don't plan. What most companies I've seen get into is like, oh gosh, we came up with this and this last minute. Why even bother? And if you don't knock out what can be planned for, then you won't have the margin to handle what can't be planned for.
Yeah.
And so, you've got to do that. So that's where I would start with messages, then get into mediums. And that's what I call it a communication grid. It's an actual document that maps all of that out. Yeah. And I think it's the first step forward.
And one of the best things that you shared, Brett, with that I love about this communication grid exercise is that you're deciding where you're going to be and where you're not going to be. It's like, okay, we are going to communicate via email. Okay, we are going to communicate from our back office on the news board. I many times I've run into these situations where this company's got this distributor-led Facebook group over here, and it's the core source of news. It's not even run by corporate inside of the space. And so you got to decide up front in the communication grid, okay, these are the types of things we're going to send out on push notifications to our app users. These are the things we'll actually send an SMS out about, right? We don't send SMS often, but when we do, this is when we send SMS out. That part of the messages in mediums, it helps you know that. And if you're a younger company and you're just not even there, you're just starting a direct selling company or relaunching gang. I've actually seen the exercises of just weekly, just not as a planning for this week, but just creating a weekly framework has been very helpful of saying, hey, this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and just actually writing out so you can get to a monthly plan. What does happen each week at your company? Is there a new distributor training webinar that happens every Friday afternoon? Is there a Monday night chairman's call? Is there a Tuesday night business opportunity webinar? What are those core events that are happening? Because many times the core events that are happening will guide some of the repetitive communication that'll go on. And then once that's in place, you can sit there and say, okay, when we do have something special monthly from what Brett's talking about, right? Where does that come in? Maybe it's on Thankful Thursdays and it shoots out because that's where we talk about testimonials of someone's great story of what happened in their life from us, or maybe it's on Fire Fridays. We talk about the next thing that's happening, right? Whatever that is in your culture.
Yeah.
First, knowing your repetitive things versus where you can fit those new and urgent things in is really helpful, and then you end up not sending 11 emails on every Monday type thing. So
exactly, and that's the key. Yeah. Well, I'll go back to what you said. So you plan your messages, but if we want to think specifically on social media, because it is different, yes, social media somehow, some way needs to account for those messages, but there are also just the ongoing brand building, positioning messages, right, that need to go out there. And so if it's Thankful Thursday, or if it's, hey, we're just throwing a testimonial out there. I mean, you don't necessarily have to plan for that a month out, but I think getting into a rhythm, and just what really needs to happen is making sure there's a connection between brand position and values and the ethos of the brand and whoever's executing on that front, to the point that you're fairly comfortable with them just doing it. That's another big thing I see a lot is there's so much review required. And you don't want to skip that, but at the same time, social media is made to where you got to respond, right? and you got to be fast. So you need to have someone doing that you feel pretty confident in. Hey, they've got a grip on what we can and can't do, and they know when to come to us, and we're fine with them when they don't.
You know, it's a good note to that. Many times when a new client comes to even our company or we're doing work for them, we're always like, okay, where's your branding guide? You know, where's your logo? Where's your fonts?
Yeah.
Where's your photos? And today more than ever, it's like, what's your brand voice? It's like, what do you guys
Right.
sound like? And that's such a good point, what you said. Like, if you haven't done the work as a corporate team of identifying this concept you hear about all the time of a brand voice, how is your customer support agent supposed to know how to respond in this situation that comes up, or the person who's managing your Facebook page who's clearing comments and replying to comments? That's not something that you're going to review as the CEO or the CMO or the director of content marketing. It's going to be someone in customer support. And so Brett's right on, gang, when thinking about, hey, you better have done the work of defining your brand voice amongst all your stakeholders on the team, because it's gonna give them more freedom to respond. It's a really powerful thought. Back to you, Gail.
Our next question is, what pitfalls have you seen teams run into when actually deploying their respective content strategy?
Yeah. A good question. And we kind of touched on some of it. I mean, being too last minute, I mean, that's always, on the one hand, you got to be good at that. So that's kind of table stakes for what we do. But on the other hand, we also have to recognize it doesn't exactly give us the best environment to always do our best work. I just talked about another, which really comes up a lot, and they're too unattached. So whoever actually doing it from the overall brand and positioning strategy. One that I've seen, and this almost shoots myself in the foot because my team will handle content production for some of our clients, and we love to do it. But one of the things I always tell them is there's a certain aspect of this that you can't outsource.
Sure.
And I've seen some brands outsource too much, and kind of what we were just talking about of, my team's not part of your brand 8 hours a day, 5 days a week and beyond. We want to help as much as we can, but there's going to be little things that come up, that picture in the warehouse or in the office, or that video of someone that stops by, or whatever it is. And if you really outsource too many things, sometimes you can kind of miss out on all kinds of opportunities. Similar to that, this is probably the biggest area, and that would be, I would say, undersourcing it. So there's a lack of video. That's a big one. We do a lot of video work for clients. And Ben, I think you said this up front, but it's not about having that 1 or 2 or 3 great videos anymore. It's about video all the time. And then we talked about updating the post for the platform, but I think that's where a lot of companies are really struggling. That's what separates the great ones from the average ones, I think, is you can tell someone's really thinking through. It's typically longer posts, if you will, and it's specific.
That's a powerful thought, though. Even the thought of keeping an eye out for opportunities for content internally. Let's say you're working with a great content team, like you've outsourced some of Brett's team, and they're creating the actual production value content. That we're in this world of social media today where there's all this authentic level content that we all think about. That is the, oh wow, we're unboxing the new lemonade flavor for the first time at the warehouse. Woohoo! It's all the new face cream just arrived and we're putting it on the shelf so we can pack and pick, your boxes, guys. It's here. All the, oh, you guys, I've been sending in to customer support asking us when this product will no longer be waitlisted. You guys have been back ordered on this thing for a while, and guess what? It's here. Those orders are going to be going out. That's darn good stuff, gang. And sometimes we miss it. We just shoot a quick email out, or we do something else. And it's such a powerful opportunity to grab your iPhone or these Samsungs. Oh, shoot, great stuff. Your Pixel, whichever side of the fence you're on, gang. Grab your device and to just capture that in 30, 45 seconds of your team celebrating that, hey, it's here for you, is a wonderful way to use video for certain mediums. And then what Brett was just getting to of talking about, well, guess what, gang? Each ecosystem is different. And if you don't take the time to learn how Twitter works versus Instagram TV versus YouTube Shorts, you're going to look weird. It's like showing up to a costume party in the wrong gear. Just as far as that pitfall, Brett, how would you guide someone through understanding, like, how many of these different, because it's daunting. You could be on 30 different social channels and they're all completely different. So is there any kind of suggestion you have of, like, just start with 3 or start with 4 and then don't pick another one on until you can dedicate at least this much time to it? Like, how do you walk through that decision? Because it's a tough one for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said is the way to go. I mean, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it correctly and do it well. And so if you can't take on 10 platforms, don't. The problem with that sometimes though is it's out of our control a little bit, right? But to be a relevant brand these days, just so many different audiences who have so many different preferences, and these companies will hear that on a regular basis. Oh, I don't do Facebook, I only do Instagram. Someone will say, I'm hardly ever on Instagram, really all about TikTok. And then some people were like, I'm on a social media sabbatical, I mean, that pops up, right? And so it's like, gosh, what do we do now? And so there is this balance of part of doing business today is we've got to account for where are our people and how are we going to reach them. Unfortunately, there's so many different ways that people will do that, and they're very rarely going to change to your preference. That's what's become very evident. You see it a lot with Facebook groups, which were extremely popular and still are popular, but a couple of years ago that was it, right? That's how you communicate with the field. That's how the field had VIP customer groups and things like that. And now you're starting to see more and more people say, well, I don't do that. So I don't know how you're going to communicate with me, but I'm not joining a group, or I'm not hopping on Facebook just to get that. So it's tough. I mean, there's not necessarily an easy answer. Sometimes it comes to resources. I think the biggest thing would be if you feel strapped on resources, it's very easy to look at whoever's handling this and by that, it could be one person, it could be several people, whoever's handling this as a low to mid-level employee from a salary standpoint. And if that's the case, step back for a second. And what is it worth to your company to have a strong presence on some of these platforms that you need to be taking advantage of? Direct selling companies are really bad about this. They'll sit there and talk and complain about how they can't get certain projects pushed through because the resources aren't there. Either IT can't do it, or we just can't handle more than 3 platforms. This person can't do it, or she doesn't know it, or he's never done that, or we don't have enough for video, whatever it is. Well, going back to opportunity costs, how is that holding you back? And I think most companies are really under budgeting and under investing in getting this stuff out. Let's take TikTok as an example. If you can't handle TikTok well, you should, but you just can't, you don't have the resources for it. Okay. Well, by all means, don't just dabble in it. That'll probably look worse. But the real question for you is, why am I not investing in that if I know it's important? And if you really stack the dollars up against it, it's probably a pretty easy decision when you do that. And unfortunately, that's what direct selling is today. We're gone are the days to where we just let the field take care of all that.
Agreed.
Now we've got people are signing up with our companies because of all the stuff that we do. That's actually becoming a differentiator. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. So not an easy answer to your question, because what I would love to say is, by all means, just do the 1 or 2 that you can do and grow from there. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. It's just the world's moving so quickly and so fast. And if that's you, ask yourself, well, why can't I? And really get to the bottom of that question.
And the other part of being relevant there, gang, it doesn't always mean that you need to create completely unique content for each of those networks. There are ways to repurpose content from certain networks and re-edit so you can use it again and again. I know Brett's team does that constantly. I've seen Gail lead her teams to do that constantly. That's a big part of both of their strategies. So a good example, just to pick one, is the most famous podcast in the world is the Joe Rogan Show, just as an example. And the Joe Rogan Show is, what is it, Brett, 2 hours at a time when he shoots? It's a long show, right? It's not, I've never watched an entire Joe Rogan show in my life, but it's a long show, okay? But all of social media, it's all over, it's on my social media and everywhere else, is little clips of the show. So that's smaller parts of the show. So many times if you have a platform where you're doing, whether it's actual video podcasting or if you're doing other forms of actual generative content on your own as a team, and we'll talk about some of those methods of content, you can break it down into shorts and other types of content for different platforms. Instagram Shorts has a different length than YouTube Shorts does. So you can't use the same length. It's going to cut off halfway through your short. So you can't, use a longer 90-second clip when it's only going to give you 60 seconds. It's not going to look good. So your content team's going to take care of those things for you if you have capacity for them to then use that for their channel. But it doesn't always have to be that you yourself as the CMO or as the leader are going to be able to have to double create content. Many times it's just editing it differently for that audience at times.
Yeah. Well, I'll even throw this challenge out. If you get a decent piece of content, let's call it a video for a second. Let's say it's a 10-minute video. If you can't come up with 15 different ways to slice and dice and use that piece of content, and when I say that, I'm talking as easy as, we're going to load it to Facebook and throw it there as a regular video. We're going to create a real version of this pull quote. We're going to take that pull quote and actually use it as verbiage on our website or in a social post. We're going to create a article and embed the video. I mean, it's all simple stuff. But if you can't come up with at least 15 different ways to use every bit of content, you're a little bit blind to what's possible. And so, and that's that's the execution part, right? It's like, have someone that kids like, hey, if you can give me the content, I can take care of this.
There's such a good example. I was having a lunch in Dallas with a friend who works at Neora, and he was talking about some of their social media strategy, and they were simply they had come up with a fun piece of content that was selling their men's shampoo. This was just last November. This commercial was just funny because it's a dude taking a shower, getting his shampoo, and they had all their ladies who are distributors making their own review videos of the funny quip they had put together. So you had a whole bunch of ladies on one side of the camera with their glasses down, like, oh, what is this? With the men's shampoo commercial on the other side. And it was just funny enough that it was personalized to their distributors, because their distributors are making their own review video. You see these side-by-side reviews. There's tons of apps that they can do this for free, but they created content that was funny enough that it was worth the distributor making a review video of the corporate content. And so you have to look at your content and say, hey, is this something where a video of them watching our video is going to be funny enough that their friends will engage to want to come take a look at this? So there's layers on how it peels back. Sometimes you release such a great piece of content, simply a picture of your corporate team on a laptop watching that content, going like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious, is funny enough to put on your other channels when you need an image to share. So there's all kinds of those seeing the opportunities. And sometimes you're just like, that's not me. I don't see the opportunities all around me for those authentic moments. You need to get that person on the team. Like if you don't have, that's one of those not outsourceable ones that Brett was talking about earlier, gang. You need that person in your company who just sees those authentic content opportunities, because it will make your brand rich. It will make it feel very real and rich and close to the people around you when they can feel that. Yeah.
That's so true. One other thing that hit me too, you were talking about pitfalls. And that is just the visibility or the attention to the analytics. We really fall short because there is so much there. And, at the end of the day, we're e-commerce companies. We need to embrace that. And so we need to act like an e-commerce company. And real e-commerce companies, I promise you, they know all about visits and conversions and time on site and all kinds of things, right? And I think that's a huge pitfall for a lot of our people because that's going to inform us on what we should actually be doing.
And insights, even from that, gang, those insights go further. Today, we think about transactional insights of someone interacting with our materials like Brett just unpacked. I will share with you that the biggest difference I've seen, and we published this in a report beginning of the year for the DSEF, is also analytics of your own people, right? Is your field willing to share this stuff? And when they share it, do their friends react? So in addition to all the traditional e-commerce stuff you'll measure, don't just stop at transactional data. Go back to even the things that are leading indicators of your sales and what your field does to get people to those, whether it's webinars attended or samples handed out or meetings hosted. If you can get your analytics to be a much longer sales pipeline than just enrollment, sales, subscriptions, and lifetime value of a customer on the back end, if you can start zooming out the rest of your experience, you will create great results. And Gail, let's link to the DSES report from January in the show notes. We'll put that in because I don't want to brush past that, but we could talk about it for a full hour. The way you use data to make decisions is going to separate you from your peers. It is. At the end of the day, your peers who just run this thing by their gut are not going to, even if they're smart people, are not going to win like the ones who have a broader picture of what's actually going on in their ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I don't want to rush past that too fast. That was really good.
We've gotten to talk about so much insight today, and I'm sure everybody is learning so much. But if we have a listener who's totally overloaded and only has the capacity to do and to add one thing from all that we've discussed today to their plate in regards to their content strategy, what do you think they should focus on, and what would you invite them to do specifically?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you two non-answers, then I'll give you the real answer that I know people will actually want. The first thing is you need to have a communication or content planning methodology. We talked about the communication grid. Now then, if you're overwhelmed, that probably feels overwhelming to do, but there's nothing more you can do that will impact this year and next year more than that. Okay. The microcosm of that would be kind of what Ben said, which is, okay, try to get all of next week's content planned and complete this week. Start there, which again will make this week stressful. But if you can get on that, great. Okay. Now then, that's not what people really want to hear, right? They want something uber practical when you ask that type of question. So what I would say is we talked about video. We all need more video. Send a box of your products. It can be a video team. It can be somebody really good with an iPhone, whatever it is. We have clients do this with us. We say, hey, we don't need your direction. We just need your products. And when we have time, we're just going to play with your products and film it. And sometimes they're on camera. A lot of times not. Sometimes we'll bring in, models, right? Just to do that. You don't have to do that. That's kind of next level up, but send your products to someone and say, just play with them. But when I say play with them, think about different ways, right, of getting it. Because really what's driving it are obviously reels, 15-second reels right now. You want to talk about increasing your presence and doing what the platforms want you to do. Get all of that stuff. And I promise you send that to someone who knows what they're doing and they do that for a full day, and you will walk out of that with 100 pieces of content. Once it all gets edited and snipped apart and everything, it is really, really time well spent. It's going to just feed your content strategy forever. So do that. You need more and more of that. Okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a lot of planning. As a matter of fact, I think the less planning, the better. Worst case, you've got a reel or a 15-second video that you never use. Big whoop. Move on to the next one, but don't overthink it and just get some content that way.
Brett, that's awesome. Just start. And gang, I'm so grateful for our time today. We're coming to time on the session, but this is just jam-packed with value. We'll put a link to Brett and his team and their work in the show notes as well, so you can check them out. If you need help with this, we've had superb results anytime we've gotten a chance to collaborate with Brett on projects on our side, and we're just super grateful for him to be here today. When we unpack this stuff and you talk about this content strategy, gang, you will learn, like as Brett said with this grid, it's gonna set expectations as well. That's gonna allow your teams to thrive. Many times marketing can be a tough seat. Even if you do a good job in marketing, you always could have done more. And you don't hit if numbers aren't getting hit, sales are not getting hit, oh, it's marketing's fault. So it's never an easy place of expectations. But by putting in these pieces to practice of putting in a grid, being real about where you'll be and where you won't be, measuring the opportunity cost, measuring your manpower, understanding, do we have to pay for this through defensive costs or not? Moving into offense to where we actually can go look at our real acquisition costs. This is how you can outpace your peers. The practical application of what Brett unpacked for you today is huge for your business. I can share, even from clients we work with all the time, that the companies that are virally growing and are dynamically making a difference in the world, they're not doing that just because of one or two great leaders or someone else's great duplication methodology today. Those companies are intentionally putting in the work on the content to make it all happen. So as we wrap up today, any final thoughts, Brett, you'd like to share with any of the executives that are looking through digesting this and saying, yes, we have the short one who says, I only got one capacity for one, just give me one thing. And then we have the people like, no, I'm really serious about this. Is there any one next step you'd want to share as we wrap up the podcast today?
I think just a reminder that the obvious one for what we all do in this channel and this industry, we spend most of our time right now talking about what we do from the home office or the corporate standpoint, but recognizing, anything we do that's good can be multiplied by thousands by working with our sales force, and anything that's not done well, has the potential of not being done well by thousands. And so that's why it's really important, because even if you're an executive and you don't think whatever in terms of what we do is from a corporate standpoint on social, but really what you're asking your field to do to sign up, we all think in terms of they're going to get attention by how they sell on social. It is the fundamental way these days that we think about how they're actually going to succeed. And so it's at the core of your success.
Well, thank you so much for that. And gang, as you're checking out the recording today, if you haven't yet subscribed for additional episodes, we have the entire season of the Women in Leadership podcast that's published on Spotify, and you can plug in into the LinkedIn group as well. Brett, I just so appreciate you taking some time to be out here today. Super grateful for you. Thank you for all you're doing in the world and the way you've been pouring into companies around the space. There are literally millions of distributors that have no idea who Brent Duncan and the team is, and yet their lives are better because of the work that you get to do every day. And I think that's it's part of what's so special of working behind the scenes on so many companies here in the space. So grateful for you and for knowing you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Gail. And thanks for all that Maxim does.
All right. We'll see you soon, gang. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.